Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. Today we're continuing our series of lessons on big names in the Bible, and we're coming to our last lesson on the prophet Elisha. The story I'm about to relate comes from 2 Kings chapter 6, and I hope that you'll find time to read it for yourself. Here's how the story goes. The king of Aram, or Syria, led his people into war against the Israelites. One part of his plan was to station his army in a certain place where he hoped some members of the Israeli army would come by. He hoped then to be able to ambush them or to do battle with them by surprise and perhaps kill and capture a whole lot of them. Well, Elisha, the prophet, somehow knew that the king of Syria was encamped at this particular place and was waiting to ambush the members of the army of Israel. He told the king of Syria has sent his army to this particular place. If you go there, if you send your troops there, they will be ambushed and perhaps captured or killed. So stay away from this place. Well, meanwhile, the king of Syria and his army, they waited and waited and waited, and nobody from the army of Israel ever came. They were unable to spring their trap, unable to pull off this ambush. This convinced the king of Syria that there must be someone in his army who was a spy, someone who had delivered this vital information to the king of Israel. So he called all of his officers together and said, "Who among you is the spy? Who has been passing along this secret information? Who is it that has made it impossible for us to ambush the Israeli army as we had planned?" Well, his officers all denied that they had any part of it. And they said, "The person you really should be looking after is the prophet Elisha. Somehow, he apparently has discovered that we're here in this place, and he has warned the king of Israel." Well, as you might expect, this made the king of Syria very angry, and he decided that he would go and do his best to capture and kill the prophet Elisha. So he sent some of his army to Elisha's house, soldiers with lots and lots of horses and chariots. And one evening they surrounded Elisha's house, waited for him. Well, the next morning, the members of Elisha's household got up, and one of the servants went out and looked up at the hills surrounding Elisha's house, and he saw this huge army. And he rushed back in and said, Elisha, what shall we do? The king of Syria has surrounded us with horses and chariots and soldiers. Well, Elisha took all of this in stride. He was very calm. And he simply said to his servant, "Remember, there are always more of us than there are of them." And he said, "Go back outside and take a second look." And when the servant went outside, this time, in addition to the army of the king of Syria, he saw an army of God, one that far outnumbered the army of Syria. And there were soldiers and horses, and as 2 Kings 6 says, chariots of fire. Well, this force greatly outnumbered all of the Syrian army. Well, somehow in all of this, the Lord struck all of the members of the Syrian army blind. And so Elisha the prophet was able to come out and lead all of those blind soldiers and their horses and their chariots lead them directly to the king of Israel. The king of Israel had every opportunity to kill and slaughter that army, but Elisha said, don't do that. You have an opportunity here to make peace. And so as a result, the king of Israel and the king of Syria were able to make peace, all because Elisha saw that God was with them and wasn't with the army of Syria. Now, there are 2 or 3 things that we can take away from this story in the Bible. The first is something that I have mentioned to you before. That is, life is not all one big party or all one big celebration. Sometimes we get surrounded by things that are hostile to us. We get surrounded by things that put us in danger. That's just the way life works. There are times when we find ourselves very, very happy. We find great fulfillment, great joy. But at the same time, there are moments we experience when we feel helpless and powerless, when we think that all of the forces of the universe are kind of arrayed against us. That happens. The second lesson, however, is that we have to learn to look and see where God is present and what God is capable of doing. Elisha believed that God would somehow help him find a way to overcome this big challenge. Now, I'm not saying that God will do for us what he did for Elisha in striking all of our enemies blind. But I will say that what we know of God is that God, when we're in trouble, is with us and always is at work trying to help us find our way out, find a way through the difficulty. And as a result, we can say, as Elisha did, there are always more with us than there are of them. God is with us. And so in a sense, no matter how big the threats, no matter how great the danger, we are never outnumbered. The Lord is with us. Now, that doesn't mean that we will escape harm or trouble, but it does mean that we have a power source available to us for help and strength when our lives are threatened. Well, that will do it for today. I hope that you have found this helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next week when I bring you another lesson. In the meantime, take care and God bless. Bye-bye.